I'm sending it right. One second. Okay, so I'm putting the link up in the chat.
Right, I'm going to type it in right now, and I want to just make sure it works.
Okay, so you are good to go. You are.
Not yet. I want to just make sure I can get. I had to type it in on the other computer, so I just want to make sure that I can see this.
Okay, hello.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just trying to make sure that I can see this.
Okay. Just tell me when you're ready, and then we will be able to start.
Oh, I see you. Okay, so I see your face right now.
Yeah.
I see me. Okay, I think this is working. So then we got it. Let me close this out. Oh, so we're live streaming right now.
Yeah, so we will begin. So hello,
Yeah,
everyone.
sounds great.
Welcome to the keynote and Ask Me Anything with Professor Po-Shen Lo. Po-Shen Lo has been a professor at Carnegie Mellon University since 2010. He founded XY, a social enterprise that improves lives through education and healthcare, which began as an innovative learning platform where students have the power to choose how they learn. He has published numerous papers in academic journals in the area of combinatorics, probability, algorithms, real applications, and was recognized by the 2018 United States Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers. More recently, he is the founder of Novid, a next-generation mobile application with pre-exposure notifications, which allow users to proactively make decisions based on their risk of infection. Professor Po-Shen Lo, thank you so much for being here, and please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Well, it's a real pleasure to be able to talk to all of you tonight. Or actually, depends on where you are in the world. It might not be a tonight. It's tonight for me here in Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the United States of America. I do want to say, I understand that this is a talk that's being given in a YouTube live stream, YouTube Live. And in addition to being a social entrepreneur, I also happen to be a YouTube live streamer. And so I'm very used to giving these live streams where people type things into the chat at the same time. So if you're actually here, and if you have any questions or comments as this talk is going on, and you're watching live, feel free to type, because I can see the comments that you're making, and I might even adjust some of this talk around that. Right, so the world changed dramatically at the turn of the last year. Just to give you an idea of what it was for me, I'm an education technology social entrepreneur, and I have been working on websites to help people learn mathematics and science in more interesting ways and more deep ways. That was what I was minding my own business doing. And I even finished up a trip out in Asia. I flew back from China to the United States, landing in the United States on January 1st of 2020. I assumed that it would just be a regular year where I would just continue doing my work on education technology. But then I started to hear that there was some new virus. At that time, I didn't really know what this was. I didn't know what the impact would be. I continued doing my own work. But from where I was in the United States, the situation became quite bad by the middle of March. And at that point, I realized that the work that I work, the things that I do at Carnegie Mellon University, which is research of network theory, could actually be extremely powerful in trying to stop the spread of the global pandemic. As a social entrepreneur, my main goal in life is to try to make some positive impact and to try to hopefully help as many people as possible. And when I realized that I'd come up with an idea that could try to stop the spread of the coronavirus, there was nothing else to do that I could do other than to run forward with that idea. Coincidentally, that was at a time when many startups were also trying to figure out what to do to pivot to handle COVID-19. In our case, the pivot was actually very clear. Let's eradicate COVID-19. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we eventually ended up doing. And then I'll also unpack it and tell a bit of the story about how we even got to this point. So first, let me now fast forward all the way to here. Oh, and actually, by the way, I saw that somebody asked in the chat, asked a question, which is fantastic. And the question was, what constitutes a social entrepreneur? Well, I would say that the key word here, well, there's two words, social and entrepreneur. Entrepreneur means that you create things. You create new organizations, or you create new initiatives. You get groups of people together, you find the funding to have the groups of people work together, and you coordinate some new creation. That's what we do in entrepreneurship. But the social word in front means that the end goal of this is actually not just money. It's not just riches. It's not just wealth. It's not just a comfortable experience. In fact, the goal of this is social impact. And that's actually how I have been running my work for quite a while, where I always think in terms of what's going to have the most positive social impact. That's what I care about. And so a social entrepreneur is this interesting hybrid between an entrepreneur who builds an enterprise that creates a lot of money, and also somebody who's trying to use all of these new technologies or use whatever they create in order to enact social good. And that's what I've been doing in education before, and now also in healthcare. But now, continuing on to this, right, onto what we're doing right now, I'm going to fast forward to what we have today, and then you don't land on something like this when you start. So then I'll unpack it into the long road that got to this point. What we have today is that we at Novid, Novid is the name of the app we make, COVID with an N for no, also best name in the world for any COVID app, right? So what we have made in Novid is the world's first and the world's only radar for pandemics. It is actually today that I can make such a statement. We were not even quite so clear on what was the biggest value proposition of what we have created until really just in the last few weeks. You may have heard of lots of other apps that exist in the world. In fact, the world is full of apps that are called exposure notification apps, or maybe contact tracing apps. Everyone's heard of these. They've been in the news everywhere. And all of those apps are operating one standard paradigm, which is to say, whenever there's a positive case, go and find out who's been around that positive case and ask all those other people to please quarantine to protect other people from them. And that's the principle of the contact tracing app, of the exposure notification app. And that's what everyone in the world was doing, actually also including us for quite some time. That's not what Novid is trying to do now. Novid, on the other hand, realized that there was time for a paradigm shift. We don't actually just want to ask people to quarantine after they've been exposed to COVID to go and protect other people from them. Instead, we want to let people know if COVID is starting to approach closer and closer and closer to you, so that you have the lead time, the extra time, to do something about it to avoid getting sick in the first place. Novid is to pandemics as radar is to war. In modern warfare, the invention of radar and sonar transformed the way that the militaries responded to any threat. You would always want to see it coming. Before radar, if a submarine came, it could sneak. Radar won't help you with submarines. Before sonar, if a submarine came, it could sneak up on you, and then that would be too bad for you. Or before radar, an airplane could sneak up on you, and before you know it, it's too bad for you. And after the invention of radar and sonar, it has now become a no-brainer that, of course, if you're going to go out into the unknown, get some vision, get some ability to see threats before they come. Wouldn't it be great to have that for COVID also? If you think about what COVID is like, our life in COVID is, we don't really know what's going on. We just know in general, around where I live, I know how many cases there are every day. And actually, that's frightening. It's a huge number. But I don't really know what that has to do with me. Wouldn't it be great if I had my own personal COVID radar? Well, if you think about that, how should you measure how far away COVID is from you, right? If you think of a military radar, you can go and say there's a I'm here and there's an airplane coming, and it's over there. It's about 50 miles that way. If COVID is 50 miles that way, I don't necessarily need to do anything about it right now. How would it get from 50 miles that way to me? Oh, well, it could get that way. It could get to me if somehow COVID infected someone 50 miles away who happens to be a relative of mine. And what if that relative of mine comes over to have dinner with me on Thanksgiving? In America, we celebrate Thanksgiving and many people get together. Oh my goodness, suddenly that 50 miles away is very, very relevant. But if that 50 miles away thing has no relation to me whatsoever, then actually that positive case isn't going to get to me. What I'm showing is that actually, if you want to make a radar for COVID, the distance measurement shouldn't be in feet, meters, miles, or kilometers. It should be in the number of relationships. And that's what we built. So the way I often share slides is I actually don't share slides. I just run everything with the background. So I'm just going to change the background of what I've got here. And is this what I want? Yeah, this is exactly what I want. So I have here the background. And what we made is we made a system which can let you see if COVID is starting to strike closer and closer. I see that somebody asked, how do you even know that it's 50 miles away? We'll get to that. But first, I want to show you what would be useful to you, a user. Because actually, if we're thinking of entrepreneurship or thinking of hacking or thinking of making an app, you know, the user is always right. It should be user focused, right? And so the main point here is we need to find something for which, if you are a user of this app, it will tell you in a way that's directly relevant to you of whether COVID is coming close to you. And this is what it looks like. So this is designed like an animated weather radar. And if you can see, I'm going to play this a bunch of times just so that we can get the feel of it. I also can see that the way that this particular Zoom is live streaming onto YouTube, I see it looks a little bit blurry for you guys. So I'm going to go and read out what some parts of this chart look like. So on top is the date. And as it animates, that's June 3rd, June 4th, June 5th, June 6th, the date's advancing. Just like if you were watching a satellite image of a cyclone coming towards you. What is this? Well, the height of the bar is how many COVID cases there are. And now, right now, that bar says here, this says 3, and each of these things here say 1, and that happens to be June 3rd. Let me tell you what the horizontal axis means. You are there. This thing here says 1. This is a first degree of separation of a connection. So if there was a red blip here on your radar, that would mean that COVID just struck someone who actually spends time with you. Now, what's the next thing? The next thing is 2 relationships away. 2 relationships away means that you spend time with someone, and that person spends time with someone else. And if there was a blip here, that would mean that COVID got there. And it goes on that way. So actually, this thing goes all the way out to a distance of 12 relationships away, which is really far. I mean, that's like you spend time with someone who spends time with someone else, who spends time with someone else, who spends time with someone else, and you get the idea, 12 relationships up. But now once you animate it, it's amazing. This is amazingly powerful. If you were able to see whether or not COVID is starting to come close to you, what would you do? I mean, this is a legitimate question. What would you do? Suppose that you saw on this chart, let me play it for a while and then I'll freeze the frame. Suppose that you saw on this chart that COVID started out far off, but then it got hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter, and I didn't pause it. I didn't pause it in time, so I got to play it again and then pause it. I want to freeze it on the frame where, you know, it's gotten actually even to distance 4 away from you. Bam. What have we got there? What would you do? Yes, I see that the comments are already saying this. This is a really good way to measure COVID. In fact, this is a game changer. And everyone I've talked to, at the beginning, they've never seen anything like this before. And after a conversation, people all have the same reaction, which is, how come it took until 11 months into the pandemic for this sort of thing to become known? right? And in particular, you can see all these different people are saying what they would do, but it's interesting. The kinds of responses I see on the YouTube live chat, I see some people say the words stay home, some people say move to the middle of nowhere, and some people say quarantine. But the interesting thing here is that you are not taking those actions to protect other people from you. You're taking those actions to protect yourself. This app unlocks the paradigm shift that lets you actively take control of your destiny. It lets you decide how to protect yourself. And that is fundamentally different from all of the apps that previously existed, which sought to protect other people from you in case you got infected. Sorry, not in case you got infected, in case you got exposed, in case somebody near you got infected. Those apps would tell you that it's good for you to try to protect other people from you. Please quarantine. But you see, there's a difference here. The responses that came when I asked in this YouTube chat, like, what would you do if you saw this coming? Those were generally responses to protect yourself. If you ever make an app or if you ever get into entrepreneurship, the important thing to know is that people's willingness to do things to protect themselves are far, far, far greater than their willingness to do things to protect other people. This is unfortunately human nature. If you tell someone, please quarantine because you might get someone else sick, they will first ask, really, are you sure? Are you sure that I might have it? Because they might not actually want to quarantine. They want you to prove it. On the other hand, we already know that if somebody thinks that it will increase their chance of survival just by a bit, they will buy enough toilet paper to last the next 10 years. And I mean, it'll do nothing for you, right? But what I'm sharing is that somehow, the willingness to go and do something to protect yourself is huge. I see somebody said, unless it's your child. Yes, that's right. The instinct to protect your child is very high. But I mean, usually when people are when we talk about apps to drive quarantine, those apps to drive quarantine are primarily designed to go and protect not your child, protect other people. And that's why this is fundamentally important. So this is an app which actually goes and helps you with a radar to protect yourself from COVID. In retrospect, it's a can't unsee kind of thing. Now that you've seen it, it's just obvious. Of course we should do this. This should be what we do all over the world. Now there was a key question. How in the world do you even know somebody's positive? Well, important detail. There's no way to make an app that people will install unless this kind of app is anonymous. Privacy is extremely important because nobody wants to have an app that tracks them. Although as an aside, I want to say, I think that one reason why there was all of this concern about privacy for the contact tracing apps is because, unfortunately, those apps didn't have a value proposition that people saw that they wanted to use. So I think people were also looking for excuses not to use it. For this app is actually really useful. In fact, I'll tell you a story. There was a time when I was even supposed to be teaching in person at my university. And I remember the thought that went through my head. When I found out that I might be teaching in person, I immediately asked my students, I was like, hey, if you're going to come to class, could you please make sure you have Novid installed? And the reason is because it's not because I'm just trying to get everyone to install this app. No. It's because I'm going to be in that classroom with all of you. I just want to know if COVID's coming my way, because if COVID's coming my way into this classroom, I might actually want to wear a better mask or try to stand really, really far away from you or do something to protect myself against this incoming wave. And then I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, I just had that thought not as somebody who's trying to convince people to use Novid, but as just a teacher, an educator. And if I had that thought, I bet that every single teacher in the entire world would want this. Actually, every person who works with lots of people in the entire world would want this. That's how I realized it has power. And now at that point, it's like, yes, as long as we can just make sure it is reasonable with privacy, then we're good. Oh, interesting. Somebody asked, do masks even help? Actually, they do. So there have been studies. It is not that the mask drops your chance of getting infected to zero. I'm not making that claim. However, when you're trying to control a pandemic, It's enough to reduce the transmission probability by a big factor. As long as you can reduce that transmission probability by a factor of about 4, unfortunately, some people will be unlucky and they'll get infected. But the number of new infections will be lesser and lesser every day, because somehow if you're only infecting this many people normally every day, now if it's only 1/4 of that, then the infection starts to die down. So now let me say a little bit about the privacy aspects, because that's really important. The way we made this app is that it doesn't ask you for any personal information. That was essential. No personal information. Doesn't ask you for your name, no phone number. There are some other national apps which will ask you for your SMS number to proceed. We don't ask for anything. And in fact, we don't even use your GPS coordinates, because that would be too much. GPS coordinates will tell you who a person is. Instead, what happens is it uses like a bunch of technology. Deep tech is fun. So what we do is the phones are always running this app, and then the app, they talk to each other with Bluetooth, with ultrasound. They also check whether they're on the same Wi-Fi access point. And with all these 3 different methods, we establish which devices are around which other devices without having any clue of who their owners are. And now, if you want to report positive, the way it works is that somebody asked, have we been adopted for mandatory use by any jurisdictions? Well, we don't believe in mandatory. We tell everyone that we're working with, don't make it mandatory. If you make it mandatory, everyone will assume it's not good. No. Just explain to people what it does, and they will run to you to install it. Like that's the difference, right? That's the difference between making an app for which it doesn't have a direct value prop to the user, and where even the direct value prop to the user might be inconvenient, although it does help everyone and everyone else, right? That's like the standard paradigm. If you flip it into this is your one tool in the entire world that you can use to find out if COVID's coming your way. Do you want it or not? Of course you want it. And so we don't need to make it mandatory. Actually, it doesn't need that part. It's far, far better with an app like this just to tell people, do you want to be able to see if COVID's coming? Okay, but now the thing about this thing about jurisdictions is that's how we get the signals to come in. You see, we don't want to have any automatic entry of positive cases. That would be privacy invasive. So it's all opt-in. You have an app. If you want, you can enter in that you're positive, except that you need a password. How do you get the password? Or why do we need the password? We need the password because otherwise some people enter all kinds of bogus stuff, right? And that would be no good. But instead, what happens is you have to get the password from your local jurisdiction. That would be in the United States, it would be your county. Or if you go to a school, it would be your school nurse. If you go to a university, it would be your university health office. And so those people are the ones who issue the passwords. And so anyway, the way that we're working now, and actually if you're watching this and if you happen to know anyone who's helping to run a jurisdiction and you want to see this in your area, or if you just live somewhere and you want to see this, run it up the chain in the sense that you can always write to us. We are partnerships@novid.org. That's partnership with an S, partnerships@novid.org. We'd be happy to reply to you. But now, there were some other questions around this, which is like, what are my thoughts on mandatory contact tracing apps? We actually know that unfortunately none of the other contact tracing apps have this value proposition. And so therefore, people are thinking about whether to make it mandatory or not. And our thought was just, there's enough value that you can create with this alternative paradigm that it's far better to let everyone know. It's just like, yeah, it's a good idea. Here's the example I would give. If you're driving at night and there's no moon and there are no streetlights, do you turn your headlights on? Imagine you're driving at night on a highway, maybe not a highway, a curved road on the edge of a cliff. That's like life right now. You're driving on the edge of a cliff. It is pitch dark, no moon, no headlight. No street lights. Will you turn your headlights on? Of course you will. No, we don't need to make that mandatory, right? It's like, if you don't, well, you just die. And I guess natural selection will take care of that. And so our system here is the same. It's like, do you want to be able to see? It's like headlights, right? And so as long as you can explain it in that way, you shouldn't need to make it mandatory. Somebody asked, how do I know so much about entrepreneurship? I don't. I think if anyone claims that they know so much about entrepreneurship, they don't either. But I'll just like share, these are just from my own experience, because I have like pivoted a bunch of different things before. Just to answer somebody else who had asked, there are so many contact tracing apps. Is there any way to integrate them together? Since definitely people don't want to download many apps. That is true. And that's actually also why early on, when there was, that standard paradigm and everyone was making apps, there was a lot of a push to kind of have everyone, standardize and maybe break them apart so that in each region, there's only one use of each of those apps. And it is true for standard paradigm apps, it's complicated to try to make them all work together. And so people have to decide which one will run. It just so happens that on Earth, there's only one app which uses the alternative paradigm, and that's Novid. So actually, there is no other app at this point which is capable of doing this. And of course, it's great if you have if you want to go and find out if you've been around somebody, please do install such an app. I mean, that's great to be a good citizen. Please do install that. But it's like they're coexistent. You can have both installed. I have both installed. I have the one installed which is from my local area, which will tell me if I've been around someone to ask me to quarantine. Fine, I have that installed. Doesn't cost much battery life. And I also have our Novid installed so that I can see if something's coming. And what we made is we made something that actually can be installed anywhere now. I mean, we're not talking about you can use this in 6 months type of thing. We're using this right now at a bunch of universities in the United States, and anyone can actually install this. But of course, it's only useful if a serious number of people get in. Oh, I should also say, even though I said this thing about your jurisdiction giving you passwords, those are in the jurisdictions we're working with. In order to help people evaluate and try this out and even use this independently outside, if you just install it now, the way it works is you just have to wait 7 days to report positive, so you can't spam the system. But in theory, actually, this app could be used anywhere in the world right now, and would have one common system for every single person to use, which is actually the ideal. It's much better to have one common system that everyone can use, as opposed to, oh, if you live in this state, you use this one, that state uses this one, this university uses this thing, and it's a big mess. We just made one system, and we happen to be the only people in the entire world who have an app that does this. And in some sense, that's what we're trying to do with entrepreneurship and innovation, right? We're trying to invent new things. Somebody asked, shouldn't it be promoted much more as its effectiveness increases with more people? Yes, it should. And I think you're going to be hearing about this more and more and more. You're just among the very first people in the world to hear about this. Because I should say, remember in the talk I said, it was really only in the last few weeks that we realized that our alternative paradigm was that much more powerful. We had this idea, you saw the chart I showed, it had dates in June. We had this idea back in June, and we started making this available, to people in June. But we ourselves didn't even understand the full power of it. It's really only in the last few weeks that we realized that this had many order of magnitude improvements, not just 10% better, 10 times or 100 times better than everything else that was being done. And so right now the scientific community is paying more attention to it, and soon that's going to trickle down into everyone finding out. And then we hope that this just explodes and that everyone goes on it, and hopefully that will cause COVID to come down. You see, because the fun part about this is that we made an app that actually helps you reopen economies. Our goal is not to close things down. In fact, we're not even trying to make anyone quarantine. All we're trying to do is, if everyone had headlights to go around or radar to see whether or not there was a disease nearby, then you know what would happen? In every place that there was a positive case, around that place, people would just start freaking out, but freaking out in a good way. They would be being more careful. They would cancel the non-essential social gatherings. They would keep more distance than they need to. They would wear a good mask. And if this happens, then wherever the virus is, it spreads less efficiently. It just spreads less because there's no one to spread it to. There's two ways to stop a pandemic. One is to quarantine everyone who might have been exposed, and that's the standard approach. And our new paradigm is have everyone around the positive case protect themselves so that they don't get infected. That's the other way. I saw that somebody asked, does Novid work with no GPS, but essentially with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and jurisdiction passwords? Yes, that's right. And if the jurisdiction isn't working with us yet, then you just you can just use it, and you just can't report for 7 days. To be honest, somebody mentioned about Trudeau paying for something like this. So I should say, at this point, you again are among the first people in the world to know about this. When I say among the first, there's probably maybe 1,000 people or maybe 10,000 people in the world who knows this exists. But yes, this is a human algorithm of sorts. This is a way to have all of the human race collaboratively fight every disease. I mean, this is going to have as big an impact on the future of humanity fighting pandemics as the invention of radar and sonar in warfare in World War II. It's that big. You see, because before everyone in the future, everyone will look and say, wow, they used to run around not knowing if they were going to crash into a disease. How crazy was that? What a weird world they live in. Once you have a tool like this, you would be able to fight every infectious disease that ever came, where it's just instead of controlling the ones who got it and the ones around them, you have everyone just take greater caution. And the benefit of it is it's proactive. It lets you avoid the disease in the first place, as opposed to just being like, oop, too bad for them, too bad for them. Let's at least protect everyone else, right? And this is what you can do with smartphones. If I want to pull this all together, like what's this innovation about? This innovation is just about saying, look, if you're going to make a smartphone solution for pandemics, there's two ways. One is to take the traditional approach, contact tracing, and just digitize it. That's what everyone else did. That was the standard paradigm. What we did is we said, let's rethink from the basics, rethink from the ground. What could you do with this smartphone that nobody could imagine or even dream of before? And that's the radar. And that's what we've got here. Okay, right. So at this point, I was going to run into the AMA part because we somehow, I didn't even get to tell the story of how we pivoted here. Let me give a quick thing, like a 3-minute thing of like, how did I get here, okay? So how did I get here? I got to rewind the clock to March. March is when I started thinking about this stuff. I came up with an idea that was a much weaker version of this, but since there was no other solution in the world, I said, got to do it. And unfortunately, I couldn't find any funding for it. Thankfully, I already had a social enterprise I was running that was profitable, and we had money. So I, in fact, self-funded this at the beginning. After that, we were lucky enough. We became the first Bluetooth-based contact tracing app at that time that was published in the United States on both Google Play and the Apple App Store, both as free apps, of course. We were the first ones. And so after that happened, we actually got significant philanthropic donations that got us to this point. Somebody asked, how did we get the name Novid? Making a name is really, really hard. So we thought for a long time. And our team kept thinking and thinking. But eventually, by the way, we always want, like, the things I do, I like 5-letter names that have domains that you can still get that aren't trademarked. And as soon as we got Novid, it was like, oh my gosh, that's the best name ever. Novid, no COVID, right? That's what it stands for. And the best thing about Novid is if I just tell people, hey, there's an app called Novid, what do you think it does? Probably fights COVID, right? so it's like the best name ever. And we know it's the best name ever because a whole bunch of other apps tried to call themselves the same thing afterwards. But that's why you filed a trademark. And so since we had filed the trademark, then they had to go and choose some other name. Right, but how did we get that profitable social enterprise? Well, that story comes from before, because I actually had been making a free website, xp.com. And at some point, I needed to fund that website. So we were funded by philanthropists, but also the history is, while I was at one point, 2016, wow, that was like 4 years ago, I was on my way to Bangladesh and India because I was, our xp.com website had a lot of users in the Indian subcontinent. And so I was on my way to go there in the winter around December. And there was a group in Shanghai in China, which said, you should go make some math lessons yourself and videotape them. We'll sell them for you. And I said, what do you mean sell math lessons? No one's going to buy my math lessons. I have to pay people to listen to me. But they said, no. Let's go and we'll do it anyway. We should do it anyway. Let's sell your math lessons, right? And so I said, fine. I'm on this trip anyway to Bangladesh and India. I'll stop in China on the way. In Shanghai, I'll give you guys 3 days. So I gave them 3 days. And they filmed these lessons and actually sold really, really well in China. So then I suddenly opened an entire branch of this social enterprise I was working on, a branch of activity, which was like creating math lessons and selling them in China, in a Chinese audience. I look Chinese, but my Chinese language skills were quite poor because I grew up in the United States. And that's why later on, basically 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago by now from now, I basically took everything we had learned from operating in the Chinese mainland China market, and we built an entire US-based product of online math classes. That was pre-COVID. And we made this thing, it became profitable. And because we had that cash reserve, that's actually why Novid exists today. And I still actually run those classes. Those are called the Daily Challenge with Po-Shen. It's an online math class series for middle school students who want lessons in English, where those lessons are, they're the best. I mean, they're really, really good for people who are in the top 10% of their math class in middle school. And so because we have that, we have the luxury to go and build all of these other things. And that's what a social entrepreneur does. We found something that people wanted and that they were willing to pay significant amounts of money for, and we used the money to do something good. In this case, we hope it's actually going to save the world. So thank you. Now let's move on to the AMA part. I'm going to hit one question right away because I see it here, and this is the serendipity of entrepreneurship, which is, so were you aware of the alternative effect the app would have, or were you just making another tracking app? Well, when we started this whole thing, we were just making a tracking app. We didn't know that we could build this alternative paradigm. But at that time, I wouldn't have called it just another tracking app, because at the time that I thought of it, there weren't actually 100 tracking apps. This was like very early in the whole game. And so that's why we were the very first one to even get published in the United States Google Play and Apple App Store. So we were the first players to actually hit all the way to the finish line on that tracking app. Actually, I'll even say we are even, if you go into the old paradigm, our app is the only one that actually tells you how far away the other device is, because we even use ultrasound to confirm our distance. We actually have the most accurate tracking app in the standard paradigm. And so, you know, we then have the right to go and say, yeah, okay, we know how to make it super accurate, solve all the Bluetooth inaccuracy problems, because Bluetooth can't confirm that you're really 2 meters away. But after we solved all of that, we said, hey, you know, actually, that's the wrong paradigm anyway. And then we went off and did the other way. The lesson here, not lesson, there's no lesson. I'm not here to teach you. I don't know any more than you anyway. But the experience that we had ended up being that we got this far by constantly innovating. Actually, every single one of our things that we do, we aim to be doing something that's a paradigm shift. At the beginning, a contact tracing app was a paradigm shift. And then everyone was doing it. Then it became, can you measure it accurately? And that was what we did better than everyone else. We used ultrasound. But then we kept thinking. And as we just kept thinking and innovating, we realized, no, we should make a radar. Actually, I shouldn't say no. I just thought it would be cool. I didn't think it would be awesome. I just thought it was like, it would be a cool feature to get this radar thing. And then it just became more and more and more clear until now it's crystal clear that the radar is actually the correct way to do it. Okay, how do we want to do the rest of the Q&A? I'm just going to ask the organizers, because they were originally planning to, I guess, feed me the questions. But given that I can see the entire YouTube chat, should I just like live respond to the YouTube chat? Is that how you'd like it?
Yeah, hi. So thank you so much for this talk. I think it was very interactive since you were able to answer so many questions live, but we do actually have some pre-submitted questions.
Let's do that.
Yeah. So the first question that we have over here is, so the question is, it is often stated that math is the foundation behind computer science. What do you believe is the advantage behind understanding the math behind computer science and the intersection of those two?
Oh, wow. So I would argue that the reason why Novid has made so many fundamental innovations is because of the math. Over here, we are both math and computer science and technology. And if you go and dig a little bit deeper to see what are the huge technological advantages that we have, they derive from the fact that we have some serious math involved. Actually, the first thing was the accurate measurement of whether or not two devices were within 2 meters. That one uses ultrasound. And you can't find an API call to go and find the distance with ultrasound. In fact, you have to do digital signal processing from scratch. That's actually what I actually wrote the code for that. So in both the Android and the iOS app, I am personally the maintainer of the code that goes and does the distance measurements accurately. And that's because it uses some mathematics called Fourier analysis. It's spelled Fourier. Looks like Fourier, but it's pronounced Fourier analysis. In any case, that's how we got our first gain. And the second gain was from this observation of using network theory to go and find out whether or not to find out like how close things are getting to you in the network. This is an area of math called graph theory or network theory. And so to me, if you can have a deep understanding of the math that underlies everything, then you have the power to change the rule set. If you think about different levels of innovation, one level of innovation is you made a more interesting user interface or something like that. That's innovation too, by the way. And in fact, it's extremely important. But the deeper down you go into the technology stack, all the way down to the, or even like the product stack of like, what are we making? If you want to examine those fundamental assumptions, which is what we did, that's math. And so, in fact, even when I hire for my team, I do care that people are really good at math. I think that there's a value in being good at the other applications that you're working on in technology. But if you also understand math, you're intellectually fearless, and you can get to the bottom of any API. You can read anyone else's source code. You can figure out what's going on and why it's being done. And you also have the confidence to change it up. Because otherwise, otherwise, if you just check things by being, that's how everyone else is doing it, then you're always going to make something that everyone else makes. If you want to make something that's new, you need to understand all of the foundations well enough that you could come up with something new and have the confidence that it will work.
Okay, that was a great question. So we can take one more question. And the final one will be, do you recommend entrepreneurs to learn university math? And what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it depends on what the university math is, right? The question is, do we recommend entrepreneurs to learn university math? If it's just like taking another calculus class where you learn how to, calculate a few things, I'm not sure how interesting that is. There are some very interesting math classes that aren't teaching you how to compute things, but they teach you, or calculate things, but they teach you how to think. For example, at Carnegie Mellon University, we have a class called Concepts of Mathematics. And that class called Concepts of Mathematics is not asking you to calculate answers. It's asking you to come up with proofs, reasoning, arguments. It's asking you to explain like why there are infinitely many prime numbers. That's not just repeating some computations that someone else has done. That's teaching you logic. That's teaching you creativity, and creativity from the point of view of implementing a plan to prove something. Actually, I attribute my own weird strategies to the fact that I spend a lot of my time on that kind of math. I actually don't spend much time on math where I calculate out answers. Instead, most of the math is, why is this true? Right? Like that's really what math is about. Math, university math, if you take these like theoretical classes, very few of them are like, what's the answer? Instead, the question is, why is this? And the better you get at answering those questions of why is this, the more suitable you are at asking that same question in the real world. And I guess that's how I personally approach the real world for everything. I just want to know, why is this? Why is this? Why is this? And after a while, you find out that sometimes it's like, oh yeah, good reason, good reason, good reason. Eh? No good reason? Oh, no good reason, huh? Then I wonder if there's a different way. And that's what happened here.
That's great. That's some really good insight. So I guess in the same domain is, do you have any advice for college students to get involved in projects?
Yes. So the Novid app had a lot of college students involved in it. In fact, I'm still a math professor at Carnegie Mellon University. And when I got this idea, the first 2 people to join were current college students. One of them has since graduated. But my team has had a significant number of college students involved. And they jumped at the opportunity, presumably because when they looked at it, they said, oh, wow, it can save the world. The team is insane. Like it's insane in many ways, insanely good, and also insane in the sense that they're crazy enough to think that they could do something, right? But also you can learn so much by jumping in and really driving and doing something. So I would say, as a college student, keep your antennae up, keep your radar up, look around to see if there's anything that could be interesting that's going on. If you are in a university, chances are that there's a decent amount of innovation happening there. Could be that some professor has just realized something, And maybe they don't have themselves the tools to go and make it. Maybe it would be great if you can work with them. So I would say getting involved in projects, part of it is being open-minded, looking for the projects. And the second thing I'm going to give as an advice, I've noticed that the people who work with me on the projects, the ones who get the most out of it, are the ones who get really deeply involved. Don't get involved in a project just to get a line on your CV. Get involved in a project so that you kind of like really own it too, own your part of it, contribute so much, understand it so deeply that your line on your CV ends up being like, yeah, I contributed to this awesome thing, but I can tell you something about it when interviewed. You see, when I'm interviewing people, I look at the CV, and if I see they worked on some project or some startup, actually the question I ask is, what did you do? What was that experience like? What did you contribute? What did you write? What did you learn? Like it's a starting point for a story. It's not just like a line on a CV saying, I did this. You know why? Because if that person only spent 2 hours a week on it, shows right away. Because if you start asking all these questions of like, what did you do? Why was this? Especially if the interviewer knows how to code also, I do, I can tell if you only spent 2 hours a week. I'm not saying like apply to work for me. I'm just saying like other people are probably the same. Somebody asked about high schoolers. We actually have high schoolers working with us too, but only a few. Those are much harder to find. But if you aren't able to work with another project like this, it's also useful just to do some passion projects of your own. When I was in high school, I wrote video games just for fun. You can still find them. If you search for my name on the internet, Po-Shen Lo, you will find my website. If you go digging into my Carnegie Mellon website, dig hard enough, you'll find some links to video games I wrote in 1997 and 1999 for no other reason than just to see to myself, to prove to myself that I could do it. And I've spent a significant amount of my time actually just writing random programs to do things. All of those skills come in handy if at some point you come up with a crazy idea that could make a huge impact.
So unfortunately, we are at the time to end this session. So I hope everyone enjoyed and learning more about Professor Lowe and his work. Professor Lowe, we would like to thank you again for taking your time and out of your day to help inform all of us about yourself and your very interesting work, and your insight as well. So is there any method of contact for students who have more questions for you regarding anything?
So I should say the way that I do these things is that I come to events like this and I run the live stream, and I'm happy to have this great interaction with all of you guys while it's live. Unfortunately, I get so many emails from all over the world that I'm not actually able to respond to them properly. So all I would say is if you want to get in touch with me, the best thing to do is to go and find out where my next appearance is, show up in the live chat and start talking. That's the best way. Otherwise, if you want to just follow the kinds of things that I'm doing, I guess if you follow my Twitter, it's at Po-Shen Lo, all smashed together. You can see occasional things. If you follow my Facebook, you can see occasional things. Follow Novid. You can go and see what we're up to. I live a fairly public life in that I keep coming up with random things and then trying to disseminate them to the world. So I'd say the best thing is if you like anything that you saw, oh yeah, I have a YouTube channel too. Actually, if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, it's the Daily Challenge with Po-Shen Lo. You'll see occasional. Actually, you can even watch the classes I give to Carnegie Mellon students. Oh my gosh, someone was asking about like math classes, right? So I live stream my math classes. So I actually just live stream my math classes I teach at Carnegie Mellon University because of this pandemic. So I've just been throwing them all onto YouTube. So you can sort of like if you like anything you saw, if you follow these kinds of things, that's the easiest way to do this. And I wish all of you the very best in all of your work. I will tell you that when I was in college, I had no idea what I would be doing someday. I just tried to keep learning stuff, keep building things, keep making my own crazy projects. I can tell that that's your kind of personality too, because otherwise you wouldn't be doing dev hacks. So I wish you all the very best. And I hope that someday, maybe 20, 30 years from now, when the world needs your help, please come forward. We need all the social entrepreneurs we can get. Thank you.
Thank you once again.